thanks very much for the invitation. It's great to be here. I didn't know about the politics in the pub till Noah mentioned, who's also teaching at Macquarie, so maybe I'll try and come back every Thursday now. I'm not sure, Greg and I haven't had a chance to talk about what we're doing, and we don't want to say the same stuff. So maybe Greg will talk about what's happening in Turkey now more. I'm not 100% sure. I thought that I might give a little bit more of a longer historical perspective. I'll come up to the present because, as Peter said, I was just in Turkey, but only just for February. I was in Istanbul, and Istanbul's different to the rest of Turkey, and some parts of Turkey you can't go to, so it's hard to speak about Turkey as a whole. I'll maybe just say some final remarks about what's happening in Istanbul in the present, but I thought that maybe I'd begin by going back to 1994. So 1994 is the year that and this is always a tricky thing with Turkey about what names and how we're going to describe things, but in 1994 I just call it an Islamic friendly party won the councils of Istanbul, Ankara. So the two biggest and most important cities in Turkey, for the first time in Republican history, was won by a Muslim party. We can talk about what does that mean. It was the Refah party. So they won the elections in the councils. They became the ruling party in Istanbul, and of course the mayor of Istanbul at that time was Tayyip Erdogan. So that's really the first time that Tayyip Erdogan appears on the political scene. He's been coming through the youth ranks of the Refah party, and he wins the election, becomes the mayor of Istanbul. 1994 is sort of interesting as well for me personally, because it was in 1994 that I not first went to Turkey, because I'd been going on and off, but I went to Turkey to begin my doctoral research. So in 1994, pretty soon after the Refah party won the elections in Istanbul and Ankara, I went to Turkey to study Refah party. And because I'm an anthropologist, basically for 2.5 years I hung around with people in Istanbul, went to all the different political events that were organised by Refah, and also because Refah party was just part of actually a very lively Islamic movement, we can say. So not just Refah, there was a huge range of groups that were doing different political activities in Istanbul. Conferences, workshops, seminar series on a whole range of topics. So it was actually a really great time to be in Istanbul, a great time to be doing research, and of course I was trying to get some idea about what this party was doing once it came into office. So because it was the first time that a Muslim-friendly party had actually won office in Turkey, there was a great deal of fear from people who hadn't voted for them minimally about what was the party going to do. For example, I remember being there and the main opposition papers said things like, oh no, Tayyip Erdogan's going to make all women wear the headscarf. So there was lots of fears from secular people about exactly what would the party do. The party itself, in their program, really, why I don't actually use the word that they're an Islamic party, they were using a different type of language, but the language was vote for us. Really the language was vote for us and we'll fix up all the problems, the urban problems in Istanbul. Istanbul is a massive city. Istanbul in 1993-94 had huge problems with its infrastructure. Istanbul had lots of problems with electricity. The water was cut off all the time. So in one way, all they said was, vote for us. One, we're honest. And two, we're just going to be more efficient. And because we're honest and efficient, we're going to be a much better municipality party. We're going to fix up the sort of services of Istanbul. And really, on one grounds, that's what they did. Since 1994 under Refah, and then of course under the AK Party, Istanbul services they're not comparable, honestly, when I was first coming to Istanbul way back in 1990. So that's one of the reasons why this tradition has been very successful. They have a coded language, perhaps sometimes they talk more ideologically, but in the main they're a sort of a, it's hard to know the words for Turkey, a right-wing but very successful Fabian party who's doing the gas and the water and making sure that all those things work in Istanbul, and as well as that doing some really big infrastructure projects. So Istanbul is also, it's not comparable now in the terms of how easy it is to move around the city. I mean, Istanbul is a massive city. It's, who knows what the population is, because the census data is never accurate, but it could be 17, 18 million people. And it's hugely spread out as well. I mean, its footprint is enormous. So not just the Greater Istanbul Council, which was won by Refah, but all the more local councils, which in the main, in all the poorer parts of Istanbul, were also won by the Refah party, have been very efficient. So that's sort of 1994. Now, really briefly, as I said, the previous government in Turkey had often presented itself as being secular, and honestly, this may be complicated. Secular is not a very good word to describe that ruling tradition of republicanism in Turkey. There's a debate about what secularism actually means, but no, we can talk about it later. Turkish republicanism is not secular in the way that we would think about what secularism is. I mean, we meaning, when we think about how secularism works in Australia, we see that the religious institutions are independent of the state. That's what it means to be secular, our understanding. That's not Turkish secularism. Turkish secularism means the religious institutes are incorporated within the state. So the main, and that's actually why the Turkish word is not secularism, and there's just a problem with translation. It's coming from the French tradition, it's laic. It's laicism, if you want the English translation of it. And laicism is not a let the religious institution organise itself and do according to what its religious programs will be. It's an incorporation of the religious institution within the state itself. So ever since 1924 or 25, every Hodja, what's another word for Hodja? Every person who works in the mosque, does the call to prayer, is actually a paid employee of the state. So that means that there is a religious bureaucracy which pays the religious institution. So what does that mean? That means, of course, that, and we still see it now, that it's possible that the state will say to the Hodjas who are working all over Turkey, this is the sermon that you're going to deliver on Friday. Of course, if that was in Australia, it would be an absolute outrage, wouldn't it? If the government said, oh, I'm sending this off to the Catholic Church or the Anglican Church or to the Çanakkale Mosque, here is the sermon that you'll preach on Friday or Sunday. Everyone would go, what the hell? What are you doing? Of course you're not going to tell us what to... So there's this confusion, I guess. The Turkish Republican tradition, it's not secular in the way that we know it. It's an incorporation of Islam. It's a nationalisation of Islam. I'm sorry. One of the other topics that I've been studying in Turkey has been the issue of Turkish nationalism. And not just with the Kurdish issue in Turkey, but with other types of minorities in Turkey as well. Ever since 1923, Turkish state tradition has been, firstly, an incorporation of religion into the state, and then secondly, a very heavy assimilative and nationalistic program. And we can talk about that later on as well. So, 1994, Refah wins the election, and we see a transformation in Istanbul Minareti. Now, if I jump ahead a little bit more, in 2002, after the Refah party has been closed down by this straight state tradition of secularism, let's say, it reopens up itself, and now it's changed its name to the AK Party. So the Justice and Development Party in English. And Tayyip Erdogan has moved now from the local arena, the council arena of Istanbul, to the national arena, and he becomes the leader of AK Party and then wins the election in 2002. So that election is a very significant date for Turkey because AK Party doesn't need to enter into a coalition. Up until 2002, there was some REFA was in the national government in a coalition as a minor party, but for the first time, a so-called religious party actually gets control of the parliament by itself. And of course that also is an issue of concern, perhaps for lots of people. I mean, if you think it's a Muslim party, if you think that the AK Party is going to now bring in a program of Islamisation of some kind or other, of course you might be worried about the fact that they're the sovereign power in the parliament. Of course that also didn't happen. So in fact from 2002, the dates are always a bit flexible. Up until 2013, I personally think the AK Party was a liberalising force in Turkey. The AK Party nearly got closed down in that period. There was threats of military coups, etc. And it was a force that was trying in some ways to open up Turkish politics to stop the type of secular push from the state, which was basically saying we don't like to have even a Muslim-friendly party in government. That's not legitimate. That's not the Turkish history, and therefore there was a constant threat that perhaps AK Party would close down. If we go a little bit further, something happens. And this maybe Greg will have more insights into it. Maybe even people who have been affiliated with different organisations within Turkey will have some insights into it. Something happens around 2013. One, there's a very big protest in Istanbul against the AK Party. It's called the Gezi Park. So I was there with Banu in that period. Like everyone, we got gassed by the police. And there was a big debate about exactly what was that movement, who was doing it, what did they want. But it became a pretty well-known movement because somehow or other it gets connected up with some other similar types of movements in New York or a lot of places, quite a lot of the Occupy movements around the world. Now the AK Party crushes this movement, which when you look at some of their main program was really, and the initial reason for it was actually to say we can see that AK Party's done a really fantastic job in terms of developing Istanbul and their urban development, but we want to have some say into the city. And one of the things we don't want is to have the few green spaces in Istanbul transformed into another shopping centre. And there's 1 million shopping centres in Istanbul. That was just one of the reasons. There was a lot of people who were in the park during the protest, and I think we would have all heard of it because it was fairly well known. It was fairly well reported on in Australia. AK Party crushes that movement, and after then, for whatever reason, I think we can see a bit of a change in the ruling strategies of the AK Party. It seems like from being a party that had a liberal element within it, that protest movement was crushed, and the liberal elements within AK Party who may have supported a different policy from the government were also driven out of the party. So I think AK Party's had a type of change since 1913, and we can now begin to become a little bit more into the present. I've got much time.
You've got about seven minutes.
Okay, so this is like a flying history of the last 20 years of Turkish politics.
Go a bit longer.
And I mean, I'm also mainly just talking about the events that I've been interested in because I've been doing field work on them. There's plenty of other things that I might talk about as important highlights, but I just want to talk about the ones that I can say, yeah, I was there, I've done field work, I've been interviewing people, etc. I've written about those types of those issues. Just as actually as an interlude. So if we jump right up to the present, maybe. So 2013, there's the Gezi Park. 2015, there's new national elections in Turkey. And they're significant just on the numbers. AK Party, from being a party that had an absolute majority and didn't need to go into a coalition, in 2015 had an election for the first time since 2002. They really needed to go into a coalition to form government. They got 41 or 42% of the vote. That means 58% of voters voted for other parties other than the AK Party. That was a very spread out type of electoral vote. The AK Party refused to accept that election. They refused to move it to coalition talks. Some of the other political parties as well refused to move into coalition talks with some other parties. Of course, the Kurdish issue is always bubbling along in Turkey as a massive problem, a massive response to Turkish nationalism, a massive response to Kemalist nationalism, and a response to a very heavy assimilation project directed at Kurds in Turkey and other minorities. So that was another, there was a Kurdish party, so-called, I mean actually it was a Kurdish party, but it had a lot of people from other, who weren't even Kurds. It had lots of religious people within it. I remember back in 1994 when I was doing my first research in Turkey, I interviewed a lot of, when I was trying to work out about Muslims in Istanbul, I of course interviewed a lot of religious Kurds. And some of those Kurds that I interviewed there, because they may have been producing magazines, etc., are actually HDP now, are HDP parliamentarians. For example, one person who I became pretty close with, Altan Tan, is a HDP parliamentarian for Diyarbakir. Of course, there was another guy, Mehmet Metiner, who is a Kurd from Bitlis. He's been well aligned with the Refah Party tradition. Actually, he's a funny, flighty guy. At another stage, he's gone off and joined a different party. He's now back in the AK Party. So, I mean, you can see there's sort of confusions around the political party and what their pure ideology is or what their pragmatic politics is. But the HDP, it is also a coalition, if you want to put it like that. It's not just the Kurdish party. It got a surprising amount of votes in 2015 from Istanbul. I was in Beyoğlu. Beyoğlu is not a typical part of Istanbul, but it got a politician up from Istanbul. It got most of its politicians from the southeast of Turkey, but it got people in from Ankara and from Istanbul. So that has been going along as well. So that the AK Party didn't accept the election, basically refused to go into a coalition, and had another election in the end of 2015. That election, they managed to cobble together their support once again, and they had 50%, though they've formed a majority government since 2015. If you ask me, that period between the election in June and the November election in later in the year, was now, in retrospect, gives us some idea of the situation in Turkey today. There was a lot of, before the election happened, there was a lot of violence directed at candidates of other parties. There was a lot of intimidation going on in different parts of Turkey. And of course, there's the question with the so-called peace move between the AK Party and the some of the Kurdish opposition, which fell apart exactly in this period between the elections. 2015, they came back into the majority, and then we see the attempted military coup in June this year. So AK Party had 7 months. There was already a falling out between some people who had previously supported the AK Party, and in June this year there was an attempted military coup.
2016.
2016. Oh, what happened? Yes, sorry, 2017 now.
Yeah.
I've lost a year. In 2016. Now, AK Party and Tayyip Erdogan is convinced that they know who was behind the coup. They claim that it was, and Greg might explain what the Gulen movement is and its history. They claim that it was a group within Turkey, which is also a global movement, had a faction within the military and somehow or other organised the military coup. That may or may not be true, because I really don't know. It's hard to believe the AK Party. So I personally don't know. I don't believe that the AK Party did it themselves. Of course, there's a sort of conspiracy theory that they actually did it, or they knew it was coming, and it was a great godsend for them, because in fact their response was, it was a very badly organised coup. It was incredibly insignificant when we look at a proper military coup in Turkey, which is the 1980 military coup, which I have been now nearly finished the book on. That was a military coup. That was properly organised. The whole chain of military command was behind the coup. The city of Istanbul was occupied. Istanbul went into martial law for 2 years. This was a very badly organised coup, and it fell apart in a day or two. So, but the end result, of course, is it has presented the government with a legitimate reason to declare a state of emergency. At the current Turkish constitution, a state of emergency declared by a government should only run for 3 months. But of course, the first thing that the AK Party did when it declared the state of emergency was to change the provisions under which the Council of Ministers can govern. So the state of emergency means that there is a state of ministers who now rule by decree. The parliament is shut down. I mean, it may be operating, but there is no interchange between the Council of Ministers. I personally think it's almost like a junta. I mean, people won't like that word perhaps, but it's a bit like that. It's a military, it's the Council of Ministers, which is carefully selected and is chaired by the President Tayyip Erdogan. And the first thing that they did in a couple of their decrees was to even make a stronger account of what the rights of people were now in terms of these decrees that they're using to govern Turkey. And it is very hard in Turkey, because there's been a suspension of human rights, it is very hard in Turkey now to even go to court to have some type of appeal about if you're being arrested, etc. Because the first decree made it almost impossible for that to happen. Okay, I'm not a lawyer, and Turkish legal history and clauses are incredibly complicated, but that's the situation at the moment. So Turkey is now the AK Party has extended it twice, all in the name of pacifying society, in the name of trying to weed out a group of people that it's claimed has infiltrated the state. And as an opportunistic possibility of also closing down a lot of other oppositional types of groups in Turkey. So it is like a situation of, what do we call it? I mean, I don't know what the word is. It's a type of authoritarian situation we're living, this current situation in Turkey. Now, of course, that would be bad enough, but we can't be too pious. France is still in a state of emergency law, and you wonder how long they're going to go on for. So, states around the world at the moment are really quickly declaring a state of emergency and giving themselves a whole lot of emergency powers, which of course is a really terrible situation for citizens. But to make matters worse in Turkey, and Greg may talk about this, while we're in a state of emergency, Tayyip Erdogan has also declared that we're going to have a vote on a major constitutional reform. Now, of course, it is exactly what the junta did in 1982. The junta intervened in the 12th of September, put Istanbul and the rest of Turkey under martial law until 1983, 2.5 years of martial law, and in that situation introduced a new constitution. The very constitution, ironically, that which is still the constitution of Turkey today. And that is one of the massive problems in Turkey. That 1982 constitution is the military constitution. It's the junta constitution. It has suppressed lots of civil society activities. It's really hard to organise in unions in Turkey since 1982. There's a whole lot of things that constitution has given power to the court system of Turkey to suppress. So in one way it's sort of ironic that, in my opinion, that first we're in a new emergency law, but this time not run by the military but made in the name of a coup done by a faction within the military, and we're having a major constitutional referendum. The problem, of course, is that there isn't, just like in 1982, there is no proper provision to campaign for no. Clearly, it is going to be an illegitimate constitution, in my opinion, if and when it goes through, because it's not allowing a fair and proper discussion of a serious issue. That constitution is fundamentally flawed. But do we want to have a constitutional referendum in a new state of emergency law, and with all the various things that's happening in Turkey, in this situation? So that's the state, I guess, of affairs. A state of affairs. The election is scheduled for April. I guess all the crazy stuff that Tayyip Erdogan is saying at the moment about Europe and those insulting things about Germany and Holland and Nazism is not really directed to Europe, it's directed to voters in Turkey. Which suggests to me at least that they're not 100% sure that they've got the numbers for the referendum. I mean, if we just look at the last election, they won 50%. So I suspect they've done their pre-polling and they know they're right on the line. And given that they're right on the line, they're going to do anything in this period. And so, Turkish, for 100 years, Turkish republicanism has been a very strange beast. On the one hand, it claims to be westernizing Turkey. On the other hand, it's always ready to accuse the West of undermining Turkey. It's always ready to accuse the West of destroying Turkish culture. There's a sort of a duel. We both want to be like the West, but we actually hate the West. We don't trust them. Turkish culture is being contaminated by all these things. That type of paranoid discourse really is what Tayyip Erdogan is appealing to now, and it has a very strong appeal to normal Turkish voters because they don't know if the West is machinating to do things against Turkey. But if the President of the Republic is saying they're doing all this stuff to us, of course there's the whole issues in Syria and all that, which we'll just put aside for now. We can talk about it later. You can see perhaps just at the moment that there is a really desperate struggle to get the referendum over the line. I think they'll have to win the election. And actually, I also wonder if they didn't win the election, what would happen? So in one way, I mean, if I was voting, I would vote no. But I wonder what would happen. I mean, if actually the no vote goes ahead, because it would still be in a situation of emergency law. So yeah, that's sort of the current situation as far as in 20 minutes I can talk. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.